So we're going to start off talking about Arras Minerals. Gorm, it was great to have you over in Kazakhstan here a few weeks ago to have a look for yourself. Arras is a TSX venture listed company under the symbol of ARK. Relatively new. We've really only been public for about 12 months or so now. But we're into a fascinating sort of part of the world, Kazakhstan. We're 100% focused there on large copper opportunities and early mover. And over the next number of minutes here, or probably 60 or 70 minutes, we're gonna run through the story. Tim Barry and myself co-manage the company, and we're really excited to talk to you about what we're doing in Kazakhstan. So we've got the obligatory forward-looking statements that say that we will be making forward-looking statements throughout the presentation. So let's kick it off. So Arras Minerals, who's Arras? So Arras was really developed and spun out of another company called Silver Bull Resources that had been focused in Mexico. But the opportunity presented itself really through Tim and the team identifying that Kazakhstan was starting to go through a lot of real positive change when it came to the overall mining law, a lot of reforms on the fiscal and economic front. And ultimately, about 2 years ago, was able to establish itself in the country through the acquisition or the option to purchase a project called Beskauga. On our board, Brian Edgar, chairman, Wes Carson, who's currently VP of Mining Operations for Wheaton Precious. Vera Kobalia is a director, and Vera actually has spent time working in Kazakhstan. She was the deputy chair of the Astana World Exposition a few years ago. Dan Koons, former president of Ivanhoe, and so spent quite a bit of time in that part of the world in Mongolia, but also in Kazakhstan briefly. And then, of course, Christian Malau, the former CEO of Equinox Gold, current CEO of Blue Dot. Tim's a geologist. He's moved his entire family to Kazakhstan, so is based in Kazakhstan. I'm based in Vancouver. Chris Richards, our CFO, and Matt Booth just recently joined us as VP Exploration. He also will be relocating to Kazakhstan here in a couple of months. And the other aspect, which is really important, I think, for us, is our technical advisory team. So Dr. Hart, former executive director of the MDRU, University of British Columbia, a worldwide known porphyry expert. Steve Israel, one of the best structural geologists out there, and Dr. John Mark Stouty as well, who's reviewed porphyry projects all over the world. So a really good set of sounding boards there for us as we move ahead. Looking at the capital structure, you can see there just about 68 million shares outstanding, cash in the bank, early part of May, just under $3 million Canadian. And probably an important point here to point out is a few months ago, Teck Resources out of Canada came in as a strategic holder. They invested 9.9% at a premium to the market. Teck is just an equity holder and is obviously very interested about Kazakhstan and what's happening in Kazakhstan here as we move forward, specifically focusing on the base metal arena. So the opportunity that we see here is obviously Kazakhstan has gone through a lot of change over the last 4 or 5 years, really on the back of the reforms that President Tokayev has been spearheading through, and they've even kind of increased in speed over the last 18 months. It's a jurisdiction that understands mining, encourages mining, yet it's a really big country. It's the 9th largest country in the world with only 18 million people. That is relatively spread out, but a country that understands resources, encourages resource development, and for us getting in early, really on the back of a major change to the overall legislation. That legislation changed in late 2018, and what the Kazakhstan government did is they cast the net abroad to see what works. They knew that they wanted to move away from the current structure, which was more Soviet-based, obviously historically, more of a contract system, and they copied the best in the world. They took Western Australia, Ontario, and Quebec, and really copied it. Primarily, it's Western Australian-based mining law, And so that was a key point for us to get very comfortable around Kazakhstan and really how it's been evolving on the mining side. They've also gone to a use it or lose it framework, which we're very familiar with in most parts of the world. Whereas if you're not actually working and advancing the licenses, you're going to lose them. And for many years, that wasn't really the case in Kazakhstan. And so I think it's really opened up a whole new playing field in a jurisdiction that's very well endowed. And then the key thing that I think we've been able to leverage, and Tim's going to talk about this in just a few moments, is that in addition to the Beskauga Project, which is a significant deposit in its own right, we've been able to leverage being on the ground early on in this very prospective Boszhakol magmatic arc, and have established ourselves as the third largest tenement holder in the country, focusing on copper, behind Rio Tinto and Fortescue. And so this is a real strategic advantage for us, and is also one of the reasons why we have had a number of engagements with some of the largest copper and gold miners in the world. In fact, we have confidentiality agreements with a number of these groups, and many of them have been out to visit and see what we're doing. So we're definitely on the right track, and it's great to be in early. I'll just talk a little bit about Kazakhstan in general, and then I'm going to flip it over to Tim. But Gorm, this was your first trip to Kazakhstan, obviously, and I think what we've found is that most folks that are coming, often it is their first time, particularly in North America. I mean, it's not a well-known country, but time and time again, and I think almost across the board, it's really a real eye opener for folks in terms of what they see when they come to the country, when they engage with the local businesses, with the government, and they come out to our projects as well. As I mentioned, it's a large country. It's but a small population that's spread out. So 18 million people over the 9th largest country in the world. Very large resource endowment. Of course, they have a significant oil and gas industry in the western part of the country. Mining is important as well. I mean, companies like Glencore, through their Kaz Zinc business, have a significant amount of their annual EBITDA coming out of the country. And the government itself is a presidential republic. President Tokayev was reelected in 2022. He's passed legislation as part of these reforms as well, where the president can only run for a 7-year term, and this is part and parcel with him continuing to really add a lot of these Western-like reforms. And when you look at some of the statistics in terms of where the investors come from in Kazakhstan, most are very surprised to find that, approximately 60% of the foreign direct investment coming into the country every year comes from either North America or Europe. And so that's really migrated over the years, and I think is really a testament to the Kazakh government on the stability and really the opportunities in the country. And large companies are really making significant investments here out of Europe and North America. They also have investment grade debt at the sovereign level. And beyond mining and resources, of course, agriculture is a very big industry there as well. I think they're the 5th largest exporter of wheat in the world. And then you can see, obviously, the link from a geopolitical perspective. Kazakhstan is very well interconnected through North America, Europe, and even Eastern Europe as well. Very strong ties with Turkey. And there's a small picture there that you can see the capital of Astana. Very modern and fastly growing city. In fact, you look out the window of your hotel, you probably see 5 or 6 cranes on any one day. It screens really well as well from an investment perspective. I mean, the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business survey, which they do annually, ranked Kazakhstan equal with Canada and Ireland. And I think this is a testament to them really driving to reduce bureaucracy and reduce the gates in order to establish business. This isn't for mining, this is for anything. So a very attractive jurisdiction, from that perspective. And as I mentioned, it really is a powerhouse when it comes to mining. That Western Australian-based mining law was a key change in 2018. But of course, they suffered the setback as the world did with COVID, and so it was very difficult to get into the country for some time. But now, with an OECD passport, like Tim and I have, I mean, you enter the country with no visa required, and you saw the same thing when you arrived, Gorm. So real positive there. Competitive fiscal terms. And I think the other thing that, will kind of reverberate through this presentation as well, and definitely one of the reasons why we're seeing the majors pay a lot of attention here over the last 8 to 10 months. We know we're in an inflationary environment. We've seen things go up across the board, both domestically, but of course also for business internationally. But there's really a Kazakhstan cost advantage here. We pay about $100 a meter to drill core. The price of diesel at the pumps is 50 cents a liter. I don't think anywhere in the world it's like that. But that actually then, equates to a mining cost at some of these larger open pit mines in the country at, $1.10, $1.30 a ton to move dirt. And I don't think there's anywhere in the world right now that you can mine dirt at those prices. Cheap power, 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. And really a highly skilled workforce. So literacy in this country is 100%. Our team, geologists, they speak Russian, they speak Kazakh, they speak English. It's been just a great experience for us. And definitely what we'd refer to as the Kazakhstan cost advantage, where you compare even drilling rates to, if it's in the United States or Latin America, you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times that easily. And if you're high up in the Andes, you're probably 10 to 15 times that on a rate basis. So dollars go a lot longer and a lot further here. From a production perspective, again, most people beyond uranium, which of course is the first in the world in terms of production uranium, wouldn't be aware that it's a top 10 producer globally. This isn't endowment. This is actually metal coming out of the ground. Chromite, titanium, zinc, copper, iron ore, coal. And of course, one of the more significant oil discoveries in the last 50 years as well has been in the western part of Kazakhstan. And they are the 5th largest exporter of refined copper, demonstrating the refinery capacity in the country as well. So, from our perspective, Kazakhstan is getting busier. There's getting more groups that are paying attention. Obviously, groups like Glencore have been here for some time through their Kaz Zinc business. ArcelorMittal, iron ore and coal have got more than 30,000 workers. Fortescue's come in a big way. Rio has been here since 2016, advancing a copper asset. And then you've got groups like RCF, Resource Capital Funds, out of Denver, that earlier this year completed the commissioning with their local partner on a $500 million gold mine that was constructed and is producing 175,000 ounces of gold per annum. Barrick recently was quoted with one of their SVPs that Kazakhstan's a large country with enormous potential, and they plan to register a company and enter into Kazakhstan to start exploring. Chevron, one of the big oil companies globally, a couple of years ago invested into an expansion of their assets, $45 billion. That's an expansion of their current footprint. And I believe it's their most important asset globally. So it's definitely on the radar screen. There's lots of business that's happening here, and we're super excited about Kazakhstan and moving forward. I'm going to turn it over now to Tim, and he's going to walk us through the assets and take it from there.
Sure. Thanks, Darren. So what got Arras into the country to begin with was our flagship project called the Beskauga Project. Beskauga is actually owned by a private Swiss group, and Arras right now has an option to purchase this project. And the option terms are fairly simple. We've got a 4-year period in which we can conduct exploration. And at the end of the 4-year period, we have a very simple choice. We either buy the project 100% for 15 million cash, or we walk away and give it back to the Swiss. We are presently in our 3rd year of this option agreement. We've been having some very good success with some of our exploration drilling. And we've put out a resource on Beskauga itself, which equates roughly to about 3.2 million ounces of gold and 600,000 tons of contained copper. But of course, we think this has the potential to be significantly larger. this slide here just covers the option agreement we have with the Swiss company called Copperbelt. And in 2024, that'll be the decision point Arras makes whether we purchase the project and acquire it 100% or not. One of the things that really attracted us to the region was the incredible infrastructure. So we're based out of the town of Akkuduk, which sits 300 kilometers due east of the capital, Astana, and is connected by a 4-lane highway, smooth as glass, to get to the project. And Akkuduk is a town of 120,000 people. And what's interesting is it's a mining town. So it sits beside the Bogota coal mine, which feeds 40% of Kazakhstan's power. And so what comes along with that power infrastructure is heavy rail, obviously the roads, and then of course the power infrastructure. So we've got the highest voltage power lines in the world that go right beside our Beskauga project, 1100 kVA. And one thing I think a lot of groups overlook is we've got a trained workforce sitting basically right in the town of Akkuduk. So questions over the viability of putting a project like this into production are answered straight off the bat. And then the other thing I'll highlight is this part of Kazakhstan has plenty of water. Questions over water are not on the table. So this is a snapshot of our resource that we put out in 2022. It shows the measured and indicated, or sorry, measured and inferred, and this represents, I guess, 46,000 meters of drilling. Since then, we've done an additional 15,000 meters of drilling, which we feel will significantly add to the current resource. And this represents some of that current drilling that we've been doing. So probably our best hole to date was actually the first hole, which was 982 meters at 0.82 copper equivalent. You can see the slide with some of the other results. We're regularly getting kilometer-long intercepts of anywhere from 0.4 to 0.5 copper equivalent. And one of the things to highlight is Beskauga. The mineralization at Beskauga starts essentially at surface. There's about 40 meters of clays and recent overburden that sit over the top of the deposit, and then you're straight into the mineralization. And the other key highlight here, which you can see in that image, is there's a very high-grade core to Beskauga surrounded by a lower-grade halo. And that high-grade core has produced some spectacular results. We had one zone within this high-grade core that was 17 meters at 7.5% copper equivalent. But on average, you're looking at somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5% copper equivalent. And the value of it's roughly half gold, half copper. This slide here, again, just highlights some of that continued recent drilling we've been doing on the deposit itself. And what we've spent some time focused on the deposit and the known resource, and then we're now in the process of stepping out and expanding the resource into the unknown. So this again is a slide that highlights the high grade core to the deposit. You can see some of the spectacular results in some of the tags, but essentially the high grade core is 300 meters by 300 meters in terms of its footprint, and we've intercepted it as deep as 900 meters, and it's still very much open at depth. So one of the obvious upsides to the Beskauga deposit itself is the mineralization at depth. But of course, first things first, I think we've got to get a sense of what this looks like at surface, as in order to go to depth, you'll need to mine through the ore body at surface first. So the big question, of course, is, can Beskauga get bigger? And the slide presently shows the known ore body. That's the 3.2 million ounces of gold and 600,000 tons of contained copper. And then overlaid that is a style of drilling which we call KGK. So the entire deposit is buried, as I said, between the 30 to 40 meters of overburden. So the technique we use for expanding our understanding is a process where we drill through the overburden and sample the top of the bedrock. And you can see those holes that we've drilled around the Beskauga deposit itself. And Beskauga is highlighted in the circle, the current ore body. So if we move to the next slide, we can see the gold anomaly that we've picked up with our KGK type drilling. And what's important to understand is that the KGK is giving you point data. So it's actual mineralization. This is not a halo, which is typically what you might get with, say, a soil sample. So this is denoting a 5-kilometer trend of confirmed gold mineralization, much of which has yet to be explored with the drill. If you move to the next slide, you can see the same thing for copper. Relative to the current ore body, you can see there's an incredible amount of essentially unexplored copper mineralization that we also need to get our drill rigs on. So really, to answer the question, can Beskauga get bigger? I think the overwhelming answer is there's no question that it can. Since we've been in country, we've put together, I think, an exceptional team on the ground. We've got our main field office in the town of Akkuduk. We have Matt Booth and Vladimir Suliburik, both very experienced porphyry guys who are leading the charge on the ground. And as Darren mentioned before, Matt will be moving to Kazakhstan in the next couple of months. But the other very pleasant surprise has been the talent of geologists within Kazakhstan itself. They're well trained. Many of them have worked on existing deposits or worked with some of the other big mining companies and majors who are in the country, and they have as good a geological understanding as I've seen in any country. So with that team, we've gone out and done a bunch of mapping and prospecting in the area, as well as diving into the Soviet reports and historical data. We've flown one of the largest magnetic surveys over our license package, 110,000 line kilometers, and then of course we've had a drill rig turning on Beskauga, which will, in the not too distant future, start moving on to targets which the team have identified from the 1.5 seasons we've managed to conduct exploration. So Beskauga is the project that got us into the country, but since we've been there, we've recognised that the potential opportunity is much, much larger. As Darren mentioned before, we're in a belt of rocks called the Boszhakol Chingiz magmatic arc, and that forms part of what's called the orogenic or the Central Asian orogenic belt, which is a belt of rocks that extends from eastern Russia all the way through Mongolia, northern China, and into Kazakhstan, where it does a large fold, and we're on one of those folds. So you can see that in this slide here. The green rocks denote rocks unique to the Boszhakol Chingiz magmatic arc, but what's interesting about this belt is that the topography in Kazakhstan is very subdued, and so the bulk of it is buried under that 10 to 40 meters of overburden. So only rocks that stick out of the ground seem to have received any attention with regards to mineral exploration and mining. So right now we're in a situation where we've got 3 known porphyries in this belt. 2 of them are in production, Nurkargan and Boszhakol. Boshakol's a 1 billion ton porphyry, and then we have the third, which is obviously Beskauga. We have since done through our prospecting and mapping program and geophysics, and then historical reading of reports, recognise that the potential is much, much larger, and staked a significantly larger land package, which presently is over 3,300 square kilometres in area. One of the questions Darren and I asked is, we're in a belt that right now we can trace for over 500 kilometres. How many porphyries could you realistically fit in a belt of this size? So if you compare to the great porphyry belts of the world, a 500 kilometre belt that's 100 kilometres wide. In Chile, you can fit 25. In Arizona, you can fit 37 porphyries. In Peru, 22. And in the Philippines, 20. So as I say, right now we've got 3 known porphyries in our Boszhakol Chingiz magmatic arc. So like Beskauga, where we ask the question, can it get bigger? The answer is yes. When we ask the question on the regional picture, are there more porphyries to find? The answer is again overwhelmingly yes. So if we dive into just a couple of our regional licenses and the opportunities that we see there, this is our Maisor license. You can see where the circle is. That circle does 2 things. It highlights where the Boszhakol porphyry sits. That's a mine that's owned by Arras Minerals, over 1 billion tons, and the red area is the area that Arras owns. One of the things we can see in the geology is there's a very, very strong northeast southwest trend to the geology, and so when we do something simple like extend the Boszhakol porphyry to the northeast, we ask the question, what happens there? Well, what happens is it goes undercover, and so again, you're looking for a buried porphyry, and we from what we can see of the historical literature, there's been very little exploration done looking undercover there. And this is not unusual in the geology world. If you take an example, the company called Mag Silver had they have the Juanicipio silver deposit. What they did is they just looked at existing mines in the region and extended the trend of those mines undercover, and sure enough, found the Juanicipio deposit, which right now it created over a couple of $1 billion worth of value, and that's the opportunity we see at Boszhakol. If you move to our Elemes project, you can see the area highlighted in red is the area that Arras owns. In fact, that area's expanded with some recent license applications we've made. But we've identified a 7-kilometre trend in this area that's got a bunch of historical drilling, and the drilling is quite spectacular. One of the holes was 143 metres, grading 0.71 gold, 0.42 copper, starting at surface. And then 5 kilometres along trend, another one of the holes that were drilled during Soviet times hit 100 metres at 1.17 gold and 0.2 copper. And this was followed up with more recent drilling by the Swiss group who own Beskauga but do not own Elemes anymore. And this is what the core looks like. It's true porphyry mineralization. We're very excited about the potential here. And there's 2 observations I'll make about the drilling. Is it's all very shallow, so we're looking at less than 250 meters. Mineralization starts at surface, and the big question is if we follow it along trend or to depth, we think there's significant upside potential yet to be discovered there. And lastly, another one of our prospects called Akkuduk, which you can see. We were attracted to the Akkuduk area again by looking at historical Soviet reports. They'd done a significant amount of geochem in the area, mostly in the form of soils and rock sampling, and identified a very large molybdenum anomaly, over 20 square kilometers in area. So we went down and took a look, and sure enough, this looks like it's a classic lithocap, which you associate typically with another porphyry. Through scrolling through the historical reports, we found that there was some drilling in this area, and of note, that the Soviets drilled a hole that had a number of very high grade intercepts. So, 12 meters at 1.7% copper, another one at 10 meters at 1.4% copper. In terms of how this fits into the porphyry system itself, that's still an unknown, but what's very clear is that this is a porphyry system. It's clearly a very big one, judging by the size of the lithocap that was identified with geochemistry. And of course, there is associated copper mineralization with this porphyry. So this will be one of the key targets for us to follow up this year with our field program. This is a summary of our regional prospects and the known drilling, where obviously this these results are unconfirmed, as it's based on historical reports. But what we've found is that when the Soviets hit mineralization, it's definitely the case. There was very good mineralization there, usually in the grade and range that they report, and this just helps us target our program to be efficient with how we put our team into the field and ultimately create our ongoing drill targets.
Yeah, so that gives us a pretty good overview, I think, on the technical side, and much of, Gorm, what you saw when you're out and visited for a few days in Kazakhstan here a few weeks. I think, on the corporate social responsibility side, which is absolutely a key part of our business, no matter where you're operating. In Kazakhstan's case, like really the rest of the world, they are committed to net zero by 2060. It ranks quite high, amongst countries in terms of, achievement towards the sustainable development goals that have been outset, and so that's a key priority for them as well. And really, with Arras, I mean, we're really committed to responsible exploration. The vast majority of our team, as Tim was mentioning, are Kazakh on the ground, so we hire locally. Right from the junior level and training folks up, whether it be geotechs and up. We've had a really good experience with our Kazakhstan workforce, and so we're very keen to continue to move that along. Obviously, there's key parameters and responsibilities that exist within our exploration licenses that we need to adhere to with the local accpetance, which is like a county of sorts. But one thing, worthwhile pointing out, and I've kind of touched on it earlier, is, Kazakhstan's a big country. It's relatively sparsely populated. And it understands and encourages mineral resource development. And I think this is one of the things that definitely the larger companies are starting to pick up on now as well. Don Lindsay, the former CEO of Teck Resources, mentioned last year in one of the quarterlies that, quote, it is getting very difficult to build mines anywhere in the world today. And I think this is one of the things that's really a breath of fresh air for us and for companies that are looking at Kazakhstan as a jurisdiction to advance and develop resources, is that it's you got space, you've got great infrastructure, and you've got a government and you've got a society that understands it and actually wants it. As Tim said, the town that we're based in, Akkuduk, is about 120,000 people, and really it's largely hinges on the mines that are operating in that region. And so we think it's a big advantage. And whether you're in Latin America, North America, Australia, or other parts of the world, it is getting difficult to build mines for a variety of reasons. If it's permitting, if it's lack of water, if it's land access, if it's First Nations and Indigenous issues, or even just conflicting sort of government, intervention and mixed sort of policies. But we don't see really any of those major challenges here. And of course, we're going to continue to work with our local partners and our government partners to be a leader in this country as we develop and advance these copper gold systems. So just as we close off here, I think, Arras really feels that we're at a ground floor entry here into what is largely a very geologically endowed country that hasn't had the modern techniques. As Tim mentioned, I mean, we were really relying on, historic Soviet reports in many cases. The work that we're doing, we're working in areas that there hasn't been work for 30 or 40 years. There really just hasn't been a focus on exploration in large parts of the country. And that's part and parcel because they've done very well in the oil and gas business. And for assets that were at surface or were already mines, that was really the priority of many of those state-owned companies in Kazakhstan. But now with our arrival, I mean, it's pretty unique in really anywhere to be able to kind of step into a jurisdiction like this with a mining law we understand and respect and are comfortable with, and be able to pick up highly prospective ground, large land packages, and then go to work. And so this is, it's early days yet. Many of our peers in the copper developer space have been exploring for 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years. And as Tim's talked about, we're kind of into this for 18 months. But we definitely feel that with the jurisdiction, where we're located, you're 250 meters above sea level. We just have a lot fewer challenges than a lot of other jurisdictions, and we think that we can move forward more quickly at a lower cost because of the Kazakhstan cost advantage. And ultimately, as we bring projects forward and hopefully towards development sort of stage, then mines are going to get built quicker here as well. So we've got a steady stream of news flow based on the drilling that we've been doing. The summer program is going to be even multiples of the summer program last year, and I think we're continuing to kind of help to educate the investment community about Kazakhstan. And it was like a visit like you had, Gorm, and a few others that have been over the last 12 months that have really kind of helped with this. I think to kind of shine a bit of a light on this country that many people can't even point to on a map, and we're tremendously excited about it. And if you just close, I think Tim and I were told by a fella that very interesting. He was originally born in Russia, raised in Australia, lives in London. He's married to a Kazakh girl. He's building a house in Kazakhstan, and he told us about a year ago. He said, if you haven't been to Kazakhstan in the last 5 years, you haven't been to Kazakhstan.
Thank you for the presentation. Now we will move on to the Q&A, which will consist of 4 segments. The first one will cover the people and shareholders. Here we get to learn more about the people that manage and drive the company forward. Secondly, Kazakhstan. We will discuss and aim to understand Kazakhstan as a frontier mining jurisdiction. Thirdly, we will address the very important points of Arras's budget, strategy, and how this relates to the capital markets. Finally, we will take a closer look at Arras's current flagship project, namely Beskauga. Let's move on into the first segment. Could you just tell us about yourself, a bit more background on your career prior to Arras and your education and so on?
Sure. So I'm a geologist by training. Started off as a journeyman, if you like, and worked all over the world. Time in Mongolia, Australia, New Zealand, and Latin America. Before I got involved in a project in Africa with our current chairman, Brian Edgar, and moved into the role of chief geologist there. We ended up doing a joint venture with Anglo Gold Ashanti, which at the time was their largest exploration project in the world. It's called Being Punished for Good Work. It was 20,000 square kilometers of jungle. And at the end of that, I moved to Canada and became CEO of a company that had a project in northern Mexico called Silver Bull. And it was actually Silver Bull, as Darren mentioned previously, that prompted us to go to Kazakhstan. Unfortunately, we ended up under a blockade on our project there and needed to find another project to put into the company. And so that's when we started looking around and came across Kazakhstan and Beskauga. We, after a bit of time, figured out that a Kazakhstan-Mexico story probably didn't make sense, and so we spun the Kazakhstan assets into Arras, and that's when Darren and I teamed up to run Arras.
Over to you, Darren, if you could kind of outline your background and career.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gorm. So I'm originally from Alberta, actually, but I did a business degree in Alberta, and I got into mining and exploration, I guess maybe about 20 years ago, with a junior company focused in Mexico. And then after kind of 3 years there, I was recruited to go to Australia, and I joined a company called Oceana Gold, just at the time when Oceana was in the process of looking to list in Canada. It had been an Aussie New Zealand listed company with one operating asset, and over really the next 10 years as one of the executives in that group, we kind of went from one operating asset to multi-mines. We acquired and built a couple more mines in New Zealand. We acquired another mine in New Zealand from Newmont. We developed a copper gold porphyry actually in that one of those belts that Tim showed in the Philippines, the northern part of the Philippines, the Didipio mine, which when we brought that on at a time, that mine started producing gold at negative $250 an ounce because, of course, it had the copper byproduct credit. And this is the beauty of these copper gold porphyries, is that they really can be quite economic and cash flowing generating beasts, and hence not only do you have the copper miners looking for them, but now you've got gold miners that are very much looking for copper gold deposits. And so we're definitely in the right place there. And then after 10 years with Oceana, when we had a near-death experience during the global financial crisis and almost went broke like a few companies, we kind of went from a $40 million market cap to close to $3 billion at the top. I finished up with Oceana after 10 years and then took on a role with Bluestone Resources, the president and CEO there, and spent, I guess, 3-4 years there until the Lundin Group kind of brought that into their fold. Jack Lundin took over as CEO, and then I was, kind of took a little bit of time and was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And it was actually a phone call from Christian Malau, who's on our board, that introduced me to Tim. And to be honest, I knew nothing about Kazakhstan. I'd spent most of my career in Southeast Asia, Australasia, Latin America, and I knew very little about it. But I contacted a couple of acquaintances that are either living there or had worked there in the past. One was with Chevron many years ago, and started to do a bit of homework, and then talked to Tim about it. And to be honest, it kind of sounded a little bit too good to be true. When you talk about new jurisdiction and mining act that looks like Western Australia and licenses that you can come in and stake and all this sort of underlying potential. And then, I think in North America in particular, we don't really see a lot of news coverage on anything in Central Asia. Really anything that we've seen over the last 20, 30 years has largely been on Afghanistan, which has not normally been, good news bites. And so we were still kind of in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and I came over to visit, with Tim and spent a few weeks there, and I came back and I told Christian and many of my associates, in Canada, I was just blown away, by the opportunity there and by the city and by the country more generally, and the people. And so that's how we're here. And Tim and I, we're kind of 130% focused on Kazakhstan, and we really feel we're at the right place at the right time.
I know you guys touched on this in the presentation, but could you kind of reiterate the structure in the company right now? You have Vlado and you have Matthew, recently joined, and then kind of how many geologists do you have working under them, and what's the real on the ground, team? What does it look like? How many people do you got currently?
Yeah, sure. So we've got our two expat geos, which we handpicked for their porphyry potential. So Vladimir Suliburic is actually Serbian, and his expertise is looking at porphyry lithocaps and the types of alteration associated with them. And then Matt Booth, his training actually came from being country manager of Peru for First Quantum. So obviously got very good exposure to porphyries. And what we try to do with our expats is rotate them in and out, or Matt will be moving to the country, but make sure they're cross shifting. So we've always got one of them in country as the field program progresses, And then we've gone around and put together, I think, an exceptional team of young geologists from Kazakhstan. As I said previously, there's actually a lot of talent within the country. The universities do a good job of putting out well-trained geologists, but obviously lacking in experience. So our approach has been to find promising talent and then train them up in the form that we would like them to be, and put them to work. So right now we've got 6 young geologists working for us. There's a couple of guys in there who have had some experience working for companies like Rio Tinto and Glencore, and that's actually they're essential parts of the team, because I think they provide a bit of seniority to the younger team members, but also I think have worked with Western companies before, so kind of have a good idea about how we approach things and think. And then underneath that, we've got a team of folk from the town of Akkuduk, 10 of them, who we've all trained up as geotechs, and they basically form the backbone of our workforce there. And then to ensure that our technical team focuses on the technical side of it, and this is something I learned in Africa, you want to have a logistics group in there. So a good friend of mine, Luke Stevenin, who when I met him, he was logistics manager for Rio Tinto in Africa. We've brought him in to work closely with another Frenchman who they cross shift and oversee the logistics. So why that's super important is because our license package is so big, we've got to think about putting teams into the field, keeping them supplied, and then bringing our samples back so we can analyze them with portable XRF and TerraSpec alteration tools, so we get a real-time perception of what's going on. And then, in addition to the technical team, we've got an office down in Almaty, which is where I live. And one of the things we've learned is, particularly in Kazakhstan, you need to be extremely diligent on the accounting and the filing. Just the process is a lot more bureaucratic than typically what we see in say a place like Canada, and so we've got an excellent accountant down in Almaty, and she's supported by an office manager slash bookkeeper as well. So all in all, it's a very well functioning team. There's a lot of talent within it, and it's resulted, I think, in a very, very smooth start to the field season, as we really put the pedal to the metal and try and assess our licenses as quickly and as efficiently as we can.
One thing that we always like to ask, both for you guys but also the team more broadly, is kind of the incentive structure to drive value for the company. So first and foremost, Tim, how much of your net worth is allocated with Arras, and if you compare that to your annual compensation in terms of wages, what does that look like for you? And then we can go to Darren.
Well, I think I can safely say that I've got more of my net worth in Arras than anyone else, and so we participate in all the financings, and it's our job. It's what we do.
Yeah, no, I think Gorham, just to reiterate that, to be honest, I think in most probably junior mining companies, if they consulted with their financial advisor, they would probably be thrown out of the office because we have so much weighting into often one particular stock. So it's definitely more than 50% of our portfolio, and our family is value that's tied up here. And I think ultimately we have big hopes here, but yeah, it's, as I said earlier, it's 130% of kind of what we're focused on is Arras, and recognizing the huge upside, but lots of things we need to stick handle through as we go forward.
And then if you go down to Matthew and Vlad and some of the other important geologists, what kind of equity exposure do they have to drive shareholder value? What's your strategy there to retain this talent and to motivate them to drive things forward?
Yeah, well, I think what we like to do is mix it up here. So make sure they've got a good option package. So if the stock moves and we're successful, they're certainly going to win. And then we've got a bonus package as well, modest. But what we like to do at the start of every year is lay out goals, key performance indicators, and I want them. Darren and I go through this a lot. We want them to be realistic, but we also want people to perform in a way that seriously moves the company forward in a meaningful way. And so if people do that, we want to reward them.
The other thing I'd maybe mention as well, Gorham, is this really is a startup, right? And so we talk about over the last 18 months, there wasn't bricks and mortar here before, like it's starting from scratch. And so as we move along here, we are identifying and creating a culture. We've been so happy with the Kazakh team, and we've just got some great people involved, and I think they too are quite excited about working for a Western company, right? There's not many Arrases, hardly at all, actually, in Kazakhstan, and so that is a bit of a differentiator as well. And I think there is aspects in terms of how we approach things that perhaps is different than they might have experienced in past work experiences, maybe working for other Kazakh companies. And so we definitely bring that to the table, and I think we want to be an employer of choice. We've got lots of room to grow as well as with our local team as we continue to move forward and grow our programs as well and exposure for them.
You covered the shareholder structure quite well in the presentation, but just touching on the elephant in the room, I guess, is what was the process of getting Teck's investment like? What type of investors are they generally, and what kind of relationship do you hope to develop with Teck in the coming years?
Yeah, well, Teck's been very supportive. I think, Teck is a company, for your viewers, has a long storied history in Canada. And so that history is one that actually has included that they've been quite supportive of the junior sector and junior space over the last number of years. They as a rule have made strategic investments in junior companies for a number of years. Of course, the head office is in Vancouver. Their business now is one which is going through some change from the perspective. They've got a big chunk of their business that's in the steelmaking coal business in the southeastern part of BC. Big zinc mines, a big zinc mine up in Alaska. But then, of course, they've just made a very significant investment in QB2 in Chile. So it's a $7 to $8 billion expansion there, focusing on copper. So, Teck's been on the register now for about 6 months. I think their keen interest was, much like, where Tim and I were 2 years ago. We didn't really know much about Kazakhstan, but they'd identified it as an area that was highly prospective, really interesting. I think they really like what Arras was doing in terms of getting into the country, building out a land package, doing good exploration. And so their position really is as an equity investor, just like anyone else. But ultimately, they've spent some time now over in the country. They're getting up the curve on the country, like many other majors are that aren't already there. And I think they see Kazakhstan as a place where you can explore and you can build mines. And it just so happens that Arras has got in early and it has the third largest land package in the country focused on copper. So maybe we leave it there and we'll figure out what happens in the future here as we move along.
Now, for the second segment, we aim to solidify an understanding of what kind of mining jurisdiction Kazakhstan is. We will learn how exploration, development, and operatorship works in the country, and hear Tim and Darren's thoughts on Kazakhstan's geopolitical situation. So starting with, the potential to acquire even more, prospective land, that has, as up until now, historical data, drill holes from the Soviet times, that kind of strengthens the case to acquire these land packages. That's still very much blue skies. There's so much potential left. Can you kind of give some color on that for everyone?
Yeah. So what first really stuck out for me with regards to Kazakhstan is, as a geologist, we all know where the great porphyry belts of the world sit. The west coast of the Americas, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and then obviously the Tethyan belt and then Central Asia. And it really stuck out to me that I'd really heard of no one exploring the Central Asian belt except in Mongolia. And so, and we all know some of the successes Mongolia has had. So that spoke to the prospectivity of it. So when we went to Kazakhstan, we definitely went in with an eye for porphyries. And what was very pleasantly surprising was the amount of work the Soviets had actually done, and the number of porphyries that they'd identified that, quite frankly, no one outside of, say, Central Asia or the former Soviet countries had ever heard of before. And some of these were just spectacular deposits. So, if you look down in Almalik, in Uzbekistan, there's a 20 billion ton porphyry down there called Almalik. It's actually the largest gold mine in the world that no one's ever heard of before. In Kazakhstan, you've got a porphyry deposit there called Akkuduk, which is a 6 billion ton porphyry. Right beside us, you've got Boszhakol, which is a 1 billion ton porphyry that, is probably much bigger, or we think it is, which is why we staked around it. So, the Soviet work, I would say, found the easy stuff. Basically, most of which was sticking out of the ground. But history shows, and Chile's a very good example of that. Once you've found the easy stuff that sticks out of the ground, take a look around at some of the buried stuff, and that's when they started finding things like Escondida, which was not obvious and not sticking out of the ground. And so the Soviet work is very important because it zeroes us in, but equally, when you look at that data, you can see blanks on the map, and those blanks on the map, I think, are the blue sky that you're referring to, and it's a case of doing the work to see if there's something to chase there or not, as the case may be.
in terms of the competitive situation, are you seeing any changes there as of yet, or is it still very much low competition situation for you guys in the Boszhakol Shingis magmatic arc close to Akkuduk?
Yeah, it's still we're still the largest landholder in the area. We are noticing additional claims are starting to appear, and we are starting to notice it's getting on the radar of juniors out of Australia, the UK, and then we're seeing some inquiries in Canada. So the point is I don't think Kazakhstan will remain like this for forever. There will be a point where, probably on the back of a genuine major discovery, which I hope we are the ones who make it, that suddenly the world will wake up and we will see a rush to get into the country.
Just highlighting the situation with Boszhakol, you guys were able to stake land just right next to a producing company, Arras Minerals. That kind of highlights, that's amazing, I would say. But so are the existing producers also, like Glencore, Arras Minerals, are they stepping up their game? Okay, whoa, everyone is entering Kazakhstan, we have to start staking now. Or is it just new entries, pure explorers that are competing with you guys?
No, they're definitely upping their game. So, we're seeing a lot more activity, say, from Glencore. I think they've just brought in a new exploration manager to specifically get their portfolio up and running. And of course, we've got the entries of some of the big Australian / Canadian miners, and what I think we'll see is they'll come in, and we'll see juniors that follow.
Also, another question is: are you guys looking to just stay close to Akkuduk in this kind of region where you have synergies of proximity, logistics, or are you planning to maybe expand and look elsewhere, maybe a bit further out? What's the plan there?
Oh, we're very open to opportunities, but having run exploration programs all over the world, there's a definite synergy that comes from having your team and your program based in one area. And when I say in one area, a couple of 100 kilometers away is no problem. But you got to remember, Kazakhstan is a huge country, 9th largest in the world, and so you could realistically end up in a situation where you've got two projects that are 1,000 kilometers apart, and so now you're having to front effectively two exploration programs with no synergy. So, and we'll do that if for the right projects, but otherwise we've got so much opportunity in our current area. It makes sense to take advantage of our team and those opportunities.
And then to kind of get into the the points you've mentioned, that of course Kazakhstan has renewed their mining law for permitting generally. So in terms of drill permitting, the process of staking land license, can you kind of explain how that works and how easy or difficult it is?
Yeah, so it's a first come first serve basis for staking an exploration license, and there's a stock standard form you have to do on submission, and it's a case of just learning how to do that, and then you have to do a survey of the area, just to get a sense of the fauna and flora, which is another reason why being in a similar area makes a lot of sense, because once you've done that once, you can apply it to all your license applications, and then you just submit the application, and if it's granted, you'll be granted an exploration license for 6 years, which you're allowed to renew once for an additional 5 years. And we've staked 13 mineral licenses now. It's a process that works. We've found it's slowing down a little bit right now, but I suspect that's due to more license applications going in. But we were getting mineral licenses granted within 2 months of application. And one of the things that gave both Darren and I think, some real comfort in the process, and with regards to the first come first serve basis, was the fact we did stake all around an existing deposit, and the licenses were granted to us with no questions asked.
Yeah, no phone calls being made and things being changed. That's impressive to the purity of the system.
Transparency is so important, right? I mean, transparency and consistency, and when you talk to the majors, for example, this is one of the things that they're challenged with, because so many jurisdictions where the rules change, or you understand you have an agreement, and then the agreement's in place until the mine gets built and gets operating. It's like, oh well, we need to change the rules again, right? And that just scares the pants off of everyone, to be honest. Yeah, I mean, we've had such great support, from the Kazakhstan government, the ministry. I mean, a lot of the ministries have gone through some changes over the last, call it 18 months. But you can really see, I think, right from the top of the government, and the support from the embassy in Ottawa, from the Kazakh government, how important their foreign investment is, and how they really want to make sure that the Arrases of the world are successful. And in turn, I mean, we reciprocate that back. I mean, Tim and I are big, we're like some of the biggest cheerleaders for the country. We're really proud and happy.
Yeah, and of course, this is not relevant for you directly, but it is still very relevant for people to understand the jurisdiction. So in terms of getting a mine permitted environmentally and just a general mine permit, what does that look like in Kazakhstan? What's the approximate timeline from initiating environmental work to actually being fully permitted?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's actually a process that has yet to be completed under the new mining law. But from talking to a bunch of the folk who were heavily involved in the actual drafting of the new mining law, the standards are the same as anywhere you would find in, say, Canada, but the process is well laid out. So in part, I think there's obviously the assessment period, which just from memory, the government usually gives itself 3 to 6 months to review documents. But part of that timing is related to the company itself and how quickly they can put together the fulsome documents that are needed. But if I was to guess, Gorm, I think realistically you could get a mining permit in place if you had all your ducks in a row and you were efficient. I think you could do it in 18 months.
Well, and I think the other thing to add is that, because, as Tim mentioned, we know some of the individuals that were there to kind of help to kind of craft this new mining law. They've taken the best parts of a few, 3 jurisdictions that are very well known internationally, but importantly, they've put the necessary sort of modern time requirements around the environmental, around the social license, for example, all these things that are really aspects that strengthen our business, strengthen our assets, making sure that companies are doing the right thing, and that's what companies like Arras and our peers want, right? We want to have a team of good actors that are doing the right thing in the jurisdiction that you're operating in, and so that's actually, it's a huge plus for us to see that new sort of design that we recognize. We know that there's obligations for us, there's obligations for the company that's going to develop the mine and put the permits through, and obligations for the groups that are going to operate them, and that's what we all want.
I mean, is there any projects that will kind of set a precedence quite soon? Something that's being moved into this stage of the the mine development curve?
Yeah, there are. So there's the recent investment that RCF made into Kazakhstan with a gold company called RG Gold, and I'm not sure what the permitting process was for that, but I guess, to retract what I said previously, I guess it must have been put into production under the new mining law. So it's probably a pretty good bellwether case. I mean, I know they started the process, and they're now pouring gold. And that it seems like that whole process probably took 3.5 years to get the appropriate permitting and then build the deposit. So that's, I think, relative to the rest of the world, that's fast.
And then just for everyone to get a sense, and we'll overlay some footage here from the site visit, but just give everyone a sense of the mining culture in Ekibasters and the social acceptance of mining local to your projects.
If you think you've seen a big open pit in your life, you haven't. You need to come to Ekibasters and take a look at the coal deposit, which the town is beside. So there's no preconceptions or misunderstandings is probably the word, with regards to the locals understanding what mining is and what it looks like. And I think less than 50 kilometers away, you've got the Boszhakol open pit as well. So the area is very pro mining. They understand its benefits with regards to work. It's obviously the major employer in the region, and with something like Boszhakol, I have to take my hat off to Arras Minerals, which is the company that runs it. They run a very slick operation. I've visited, and I know Darren's the same. We've visited mines all over the world, and we were extremely impressed with how that mine was run. And I think that sets the standard for how mines are run in Kazakhstan.
Yeah, and then just briefly, I just want to give everyone a sense of some of these parameters that we always ask to exploration companies. Just looking at drilling costs per meter, that varies of course, but the average in Kazakhstan, it's very cheap, I know, and then you have assay lab turnover. Could you give a sense of what those two parameters look like?
Yeah, so we're drilling right now for an all-in cost, and including assay, of $125 a meter. ALS, one of the major geochemical laboratories in the world, have set up a significant lab in Karaganda. We hope it'll become a fully fledged lab within the next 6 to 12 months, where they can do every type of analysis. So right now they can do gold assay, they can do XRF work, density, etc. What they can't do is ICP. So samples get sent to Ireland, which is kind of the centre of ICP work for ALS. But we're expecting that will be introduced within the next 6 to 12 months, which basically means Kazakhstan is fully certified, or is a mining country that has fully certified labs ready to go, and some of the cheapest drilling costs in the world.
Yeah, so just to clarify, currently the time shipping to Ireland is that's very long, but you have the guns, of course. You can scan, so it doesn't really impact your work necessarily. But from news release perspective, what is the actual time currently, and what will it get down to, you think, once this is in place?
Yeah, so we're getting turnaround on our assays from 6 to 8 weeks, and I suspect when the lab gets certified in Karaganda, you're going to be looking at probably 4 to 5 weeks.
And then also, I guess, just to clarify for everyone, is there any seasonality in the exploration activity?
Yeah, there is. So it gets very cold in winter, so down to kind of negative 30 or 40 degrees Celsius in the middle of winter. And you get maybe a foot and a half of snow cover. So that precludes being able to do field work. So your field work needs to be done from the end of April through to the start of October. If you're lucky, you might get a couple of weeks into October. But you can drill all year round. And, one of the things Kazakhs are very good at doing is dealing with cold. So the strategy needs to be you do everything you need to do in the field over those 6 to 7 months, and then you can do your drilling in winter if you're going to do drilling.
And then this is a concern for some investors that might not know, but of course Kazakhstan is close to Russia. It has, it's former Soviet country. It's also close to China. Can you kind of explain this geopolitical situation? Kazakhstan is exposed to all the world powers, Russia, China, and the West. How are they balancing this? And can you kind of maybe ease the concerns of some investors that might be ignorant on the situation?
Sure, I'll start. And I mean, Tim's in the country, so I think he also has got, he's even some firsthand sort of experiences, even over in the last 18 months, for example. But, I think we've seen, even particularly since the Russian-Ukraine war, Kazakhstan and really all the regional Central Asian countries be very adamant about being on the right side of the sanctions. The leadership of President Tokayev has been very strong, and he's been very clear around the fact that Kazakhstan will be adhering to those sanctions that have come out of the EU, come out of the US, for example. I mean, it was only recently that Secretary of State Blinken was there from the United States and Kazakhstan. I think it would be remiss to pretend that there's not a long border. In fact, the border between Kazakhstan and Russia is the longest in the world, second only to the one between Canada and the United States. So it's a significant border. They also share a border with China, as you mentioned, in the southeast, and ultimately a very important neighbor there. From a security perspective, from a geographic perspective as well. But if we look back over the last 30 years, I think Kazakhstan has done a real admirable job of managing these very important neighbors, and they've done that also through, probably most importantly, that foreign investment. I mentioned earlier the foreign direct investment into Kazakhstan. 60% of it comes from Europe and North America. You've got companies like Chevron that are investing tens of billions of dollars just to expand their assets. The Kazakh government has very strong ties with Turkey, and of course this is a cultural more than 1,000-year history on this Turkic corridor. And of course, Turkey is a very important leader in the region and also a NATO member. The Kazakh government has very strong ties with the Middle East. The tallest building in Central Asia was, we understand, largely funded through the United Arab Emirates. More recently, there was an agreement between Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, but also included Turkey, also included UAE, also included China, for a $2 billion investment to increase the tanker fleet to transship oil from Kazakhstan into Azerbaijan, which then goes into pipe and ends up in Europe. And so this middle corridor, shipping corridor, that really kind of goes through Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries, connecting the East with the West, is becoming very important. And so, I think, no doubt, the neighbors aren't going to change, and I don't think anybody would want them to change at the end of the day. I mean, Kazakhstan's done a very good job of managing those relationships, and I think from our perspective, we've seen nothing but strong support from the government. We've seen nothing that would cause us for concern, quite honestly. In most of the other sort of developing countries that I've worked in over the last 20 years, I've lost a lot of sleep on geopolitical and government changes and stuff, and I lose no sleep on that with regards to Kazakhstan and its neighbors there. And I think it's because there's a 30-year history here of being successful in managing these. But Tim's seen it firsthand, living in Almaty and how that all works as well.
Yeah, if to expand on that, Kazakhstan is, in some respects, sort of a nation of immigrants. You've got the local Kazakh people who obviously are from there and have a strong affinity with the land. But you've got a very big Korean population. You've got a very big Russian population. You've got a very big German population. All who washed up there through a variety of recent and not so recent events, and the country works. There's from what we can tell, there's no serious ethnic disputes or issues coming off. I think the Kazakhs themselves are very welcoming and sort of curious. When I show up, they have no problem asking me where I'm from, and when I say New Zealand, they usually ask me if I'm from Auckland, Wellington, or Christchurch. So they've got an appreciation of the world and sort of the people in it.
Yeah, and in terms of investment into the country, we see, like, I think Darren mentioned this previously to me in conversation, that getting a visa for a businessman is easier from people from the West than, for example, China or Russia. I'm sure it's very easy, but if you compare China to the West, there seems to be still a preference, so to speak, to maintain a very strong relationship and build more with the West. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so, and I think it's a reflection. They know they've got powerful neighbours, and they know they've got a big country and not a big population, and I think they want to make sure no one group is getting too much influence.
They've been very strategic as well, because I think they recognize that they're in the center part of Central Asia, and that connectivity, as I said, this middle corridor transportation link between East Asia and then effectively Europe, it kind of goes right through them. But for example, the Belt and Road Initiative, which was an initiative from the Chinese government and is ongoing, and they've Chinese government has invested very significant dollars in many countries and many portions of infrastructure in order to develop this Belt and Road. As it enters into Kazakhstan, the Kazakh government has actually participated but funded all of their own infrastructure with regards to this. And this is, again, I think a very strategic sort of call, is that, yes, we see the benefits. We see the benefits of participating in global trade. Global trade is not going to go away. And ultimately, I think, with the number of times that the European Union and European Council have been through Kazakhstan here over the last, call it 8 to 10 months, you definitely, see that. But they've been very particular about making sure that it's their infrastructure, that they're funding it, that they control it, they make the calls on it. And then the other thing that, of course, is we're seeing more and more now about, which I think is even, further to the point around the connectivity between Kazakhstan and Europe, Kazakhstan and North America, is around critical minerals. The European Union has signed 4 strategic partnerships globally around critical minerals. Of course, Europe needs critical minerals for its manufacturing and going forward. And 2 of those countries are Canada and Kazakhstan, right? And there's been a steady stream of visitors from Europe in Kazakhstan signing these partnerships. And so, that middle corridor, the transportation link, the foreign direct investment, the link with the West, the fact is the most important trading partners are in North America and Europe for Kazakhstan, and not many would have, guessed that.
For the third segment, we will discuss perhaps the most important topics of today. We're going to form an understanding of Arras's budget and planned expenditures, what they will prioritize, and what their work plan is for the remainder of the year. We're also going to explore how Arras will secure capital to fund their work for the next year, and scenarios in which Arras will be able to significantly accelerate the pace of progress at all of their projects. Let's just start with the basics. What does the treasury look like as of now?
I've got about 1.6 million US.
Perfect. And then kind of touching on the, what or how large are the current, annual fixed land license costs, and maybe spending requirements as well. Will there be any improvements here? Maybe could you kind of touch on that?
So Beskauga is probably the big one for us. It was an old Soviet contract, and recently we've converted it to an exploration license, and so that's reduced the annual spend on Beskauga to around $250,000 US per annum. Prior to that, it was up as high as $4 million per annum, and so for us, that's removed a serious obligation that we otherwise would have had to have made to keep that license in good standing. And then for the rest of our regional package, we have to spend about 1.3 million per year to keep that in good standing. So, from a company perspective for 2023, we have to keep we have to spend around 1.5 million on the licenses themselves, and a major part of that can be attributed to just our geological team. So the Kazakhs are very clear; it's got to be in-ground costs, and so that and geologists are considered in-ground costs. So, but to be clear, that's just to keep our licenses in good standing. We're obviously looking to to chase exploration. So I expect our expenditure will be a lot more this year. But equally, it allows us to be smart with our dollars, and when we're in tough markets like we're in right now, you can pump the brakes a little bit without risk of your licenses being in jeopardy.
Worst comes to worst, we need to clarify what the situation looks like if that's the case. So you have 1.8. The annual commitment to spend is 1.5 plus 250 with Beskauga then, right? And then if you kind of include the minimum cost to maintain the current team for a year, what would you look if you add that on too? So we can kind of see 2024. This year is good, but next year, what would that look like?
Yeah, so I would say we've already spent about 1.2 million on our licenses this year. So if we really needed to go into a hibernation to preserve capital, that's easily done, and that would carry our costs over into next year. I don't think that would give us a lot of room to be able to do much work. But you know, when you're in markets that warrant it, it's nice to be able to just drop your costs to next to nothing if you need to, and we have that ability.
There are a lot of potential permutations of what could happen this year. But if we default to the, again, just to get that cleared out, the worst permutation, that you won't have any joint ventures, you will not raise because the share price is depressed, you're stuck with your current budget. What does the work plan and capital allocation look like for the rest of this year, and maybe also going into next year a little bit as well?
Well, I think the work plan. There's the beauty of having the big regional packages. There's a lot of very cheap, easy work we can do that moves the projects forward in a meaningful way without needing to spend a lot of money. So a good example of that is we've got a major soil sampling program underway right now where we could take as many as 70 to 80,000 soil samples. Now, the information we get out of that data set, and we would just use the Niton guns, which do an XRF analysis, which we own. So even the analysis is very cheap. But the information we get out of that is we effectively map the geology, we map the alteration, and then of course we pick up geochem anomalies. That is something we're actually doing right now, and the whole idea is to build up the targets to drill ready status. So when we do have a market that rewards success with the drill bit, we're ready to go. So if we need to continue the sort of preliminary work even into next year, we can definitely do that. There's lots of meaningful work that we can do. But of course, we all know drilling is the ultimate in terms of answering questions, and drilling is cheap in Kazakhstan. So if there's something that we have to drill tomorrow, it's definitely on the table. But I think everything has to be tempered with what does a drill hole do for us? And so if a drill hole proves we now have a second porphyry system or a third porphyry system, or now the company doesn't need to be valued solely on Beskauga. It gets valued on the district play that we actually are. So that's a long-winded way to answer. We have options, and we'll use our capital where it adds value the best.
Certainly. And which targets in the regional package would you kind of prioritize? I assume it's Elemes, but maybe you can.
Yeah, I think Elemes is the lead, just because it's got historical drilling. But as we learn more and we do more research on sort of the Soviet work in the area, we have another couple of areas that have some historical Soviet drilling. So, depending on whether we can track down those results, or the results are favourable, they might be worth following up as well.
And then kind of switching over to the strategic portion, you have your grassroots, licenses, and you have Beskauga. If you would kind of rank order the grassroots licenses you have, what would that look like, and kind of why?
Well, Beskauga is our flagship project, and it's the project with a resource on it, and it's a project that has a lot of room to expand. But equally, I'm an explorationist at heart, and when I see the size of the lithocaps and the footprint of potential mineralization on our other licenses, that kind of gives me a real spring in my step. So to rank order them, I think our regional plays are too early to say this one's better than this one, but certainly Elemes has the historical drilling with some very good drill results on it. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the lead horse. It's just the project that's had the most work up till now. So, not to avoid your question, I would say just watch this space. We're very focused on advancing all those. Right now it's 3 additional porphyry targets, with a bunch more that we're working up to see if they've got legs as well. I could see Arras in a situation where we've got the Beskauga project, we've got the 3 porphyry projects that we took you through, and then potentially another 2 or 3 fall out of the rest of the land packages as we gather more information.
Do you guys think that an equity, an equity raise or a financing through equity is likely to take place this year? If we just cover that point off.
Look, I mean, I think one has to always be open to any sort of possibilities. I think we're cognizant of the way the capital markets have been, and they've been a struggle really for all the junior copper developers, across the board. Having said that, I mean, there's not too many people that I meet anyways that don't look at copper and say the world needs more of it. And I think what you often see that kind of preempts even markets is when the majors and the actual miners are heading that direction. And we've seen quite a bit of M&A in the copper space now as well, where copper operators are acquiring other assets. You've got even groups like Newcrest and Newmont getting together, and of course Newcrest has got lots of really interesting copper exposure in their portfolio. So I think from our perspective at Arras, we need to look at all sorts of opportunities, and obviously balance dilution. I mean, the good thing here is that our share structure is still pretty tight. There's 67 million shares out. As we talked about already, we can get a lot of work done for not that much money. But no doubt having Teck in our corner is positive, and I haven't seen this much interest, at least in my career, by the major mining companies trying to get up to speed on a new jurisdiction all at the same time. than what we've seen here over the last, call it, 8 months in Kazakhstan. And I think that also bodes well in terms of opportunities for us, given that we're early in and we're sitting on a really prospective package that's growing, and we're in the right commodity space.
And just to clarify with Teck, what is their average entry price into Arras currently?
Yeah, so they entered in at 45 cents Canadian, and that was part of the financing that was done last November.
And I assume you would not consider raising lower than that. That's kind of out of question. It would have to be at that point.
No, absolutely. Our objective, obviously, is to raise money at higher levels. And so, as we talked about, our treasury is fine for now. Our burn rate's relatively low. We can get a lot of work done just through boots and shovels and bags and XRFs in the ground. And, no doubt with regards to the drilling, there's still quite a few drill results that'll be coming out here over the next few months. But yeah, we want to balance our dilution. I think there's a few other creative things that we can do. To potentially even, accelerate some of the work on these other regional licenses over the next 2 to 3 years, beyond just, doing it ourselves.
So your strategy on attracting capital to the equity story, where are you guys focusing in on the institutional side, of course? Where are you seeing potential? Any new jurisdictions or markets that you're kind of untapped yet?
Yeah, I think for the junior market, when you talk about institutions, and most of my career actually has been, with larger companies where you definitely had institutional participation, and that's been a key part of it. I think, what we've seen within the marketplace is that, there really isn't much generalist interest right now in our space, despite the fact that at a macro level, I think everybody kind of understands this greening in the grid and the importance of critical minerals. And so that will come. When you see the generalist capital come in, then you see everything sort of push down, starting with the majors, the super majors, and then, moving down. So we'll see that come. I think in our case, the size of the company that we are, we've got kind of a handful of institutional investors, but it is still largely retail held. And so, our focus really has been, probably 50% on explaining Kazakhstan, talking about our experience there, working to have groups come over and visit, like yourself, Gorm, here last month. And so from a jurisdiction perspective, I think we've had very good support, out of Europe. I think there is probably a stronger understanding and appreciation for Kazakhstan in Europe than maybe we have in North America, but also strong support in the US on, family offices and high net worth sort of advisors. And then, of course, in the traditional pockets like, Vancouver and Toronto, that have been very supportive for decades in the junior mining space. And yes, albeit speculative, but, I think pretty well understood in terms of the sector and the cycles we go through. And, most, I think, of what I'm hearing, amongst my peers and my network is that, copper is going to be a bright place, I think, for all the reasons we've talked about in a macro level. And, I think Arras is putting ourselves in a position where, we can be there, when the world and when the generalist investors, et cetera, start to pay more attention to it, because we're going to be, we think, in a good position to be able to demonstrate this is going to be one of the jurisdictions where copper is going to come from, and hence establishing ourselves as an early mover here to advance projects that we think have the potential to be developed, is a great place to be. So absolutely, we need to keep plugging away, and I think we need to keep plugging away on educating folks on Kazakhstan. Anybody that comes and visits or learns about it, goes away blown away to the upside. So that's a positive, right? We're not finding the opposite, where we really have to kind of sell it.
And then to just highlight, so raising, that's one opportunity, but the really interesting part about the story currently is that you guys have a lot of interest from majors, and you have discussions. There's things going on in the background, which of course we can't disclose. But what is your outlook? How positive or how likely do you think that you will announce some significant joint venture partnerships in the coming 3 to 6 months, really.
Sure. Yeah, I think, we've been kind of upfront over the last 2 to 3 months since we announced the results from the first summer program on those regional licenses. And it was really pleasing to see how well the soils really worked for us, particularly in the southern licenses, Elemes, Akkuduk, Norgebek, Amandai, because, we are dealing with cover in many areas. You saw that, you can see it in the photos. And as we've been told a few times, cover's your friend, because I think that, anywhere in the world right now over the last 100 years, if there's a rock that sticks out of the ground, someone somewhere at some time has gone up and banged a chunk of it off and sent it off for the assay lab to see if there's anything in it. And when you've got 20 to 30 meters of unconsolidated cover, then you don't see anything, right? It looks like grasslands. And so for us, there's a lot of opportunity here that needs to be kind of honed in and vectored in. The first summer program last year, we ran everything through the XRF here in the spring, and 16,000 samples. And as we've talked about, there's additional targets now that have kind of come about. We still need to continue to vector down, and the summer program this year is going to be a multiple of that in order to kind of head forward with it. But, on the back of that, we're starting to get a better feel now in terms of, where is the smoke on that 3,300 square kilometers. We've had a number of larger companies from all over the world, copper miners, gold miners, for example, come in and want to have a look. First, I think to kind of get up to speed on the country, because many of them don't have footprints here, but then also to come in and see what we're doing, because, we are kind of the first North American junior over here underneath this new mining regime. And so, yes, we are having some discussions about, potential partnerships on how maybe we take a license or a group of licenses maybe and work with a partner to accelerate those, using their balance sheet. But ultimately, using the human capital and infrastructure that we've been able to establish over the last 18 to 24 months, it's really that's an advantage for us. And I think also with the bigger companies that aren't well established in Kazakhstan, which is really the majority of them, they're looking to Arras and how we've established our business here. And as Tim talked about, got the technical team in place, got the support team in place, set up the office. You've been there. You've seen how we can kind of operate, and that tends to be quite a big exercise for big companies in terms of how they do that. And so we can be much more nimble about it. And I think that's an attraction as well.
So I don't know if you're able to do this, but in terms of your attitude or what your expectation, do you think something is likely to be closed? Because obviously this will significantly affect the company. Not too much money will. If you guys announce a joint venture of a $2 million annual commitment, that allows you to get a new drill rig. It's that cheap in Kazakhstan. You can just double your activity quite easily. So,
yeah, I think that that's definitely part of the strategy. I think the good thing for us is that there is quite a bit of interest, and I often in the junior space, juniors sort of struggle to gain interest because big companies are looking for big deposits, and maybe the land package is somewhat fragmented. That looks interesting, but it's right up against your property boundary. So, and someone else has got that ground over there. It's probably not the size. Then you're dealing with, bureaucracies within big companies, et cetera, as well. But, in our case, we've got big land packages. We've secured those, recently, obviously. So we've got a long sort of runway on these exploration licenses. As Tim was mentioning, it's 6 years plus 5 years. The cost to explore is fairly low, and we're in what we know is a proven productive belt, with 3 known porphyries and 2 that are highly profitable and making a lot of money. So I think it's a very good opportunity for us, and at the same time we want to obviously maximize the value and exposure for our shareholders, to what may be found in advance in the future. But we recognize that a 3,300 square kilometer land package is a big enough land package to keep 2 of the biggest majors on the planet busy for multi-years. on going through. So it is a strategic advantage for us, but equally, Arras is really not in a position where it's probably got the capital for the next 10 years to actually do that as well. So it makes sense to share some of the risk and share some of the upside.
And then I just want to highlight something that I realized, of course, is that you guys have a lot of exposure to gold. So the potential suitors for joint ventures is not just base metals focused companies, it's also actually gold focused companies, some of which have recently announced that they're comfortable with increasing their copper exposure. That's just a comment from my side. I shouldn't comment, but
No, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, even Barrick Mark Bristow has commented that copper is strategic, gold's strategic, and really most of the world's large gold deposits are copper gold or gold copper porphyries. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, my personal experience involved with developing a new copper gold mine in the Philippines was that we love the copper. I mean, copper paid all the bills, right? So it works for the gold guys as well, and I think that yes, there is when you look at Beskauga, there's call it 50% of the current metal endowment is probably associated with gold. But with the broad range of licenses that we have, and as we kind of reported, those 16,000 soil samples that we ran through the XRF, yeah, I mean, there's epithermal gold, there's other sort of copper gold moly porphyries, there's some nickel showings. So it's a big land package. There's a lot that's going on, and it's still very early days. But this is the sort of stuff that we've been told by a couple of different groups now that there's just not anywhere in the world that they're aware of that you can come in and you can kind of acquire large tracts of ground on proven geologically endowed terrain, and then go to work, because you're normally dealing with a postage stamp here and a postage stamp here and a little project over here, because you've got 3 or 4 or 5 different neighbors that are spread around all over. Kazakhstan and this part of the world is maybe like Western Australia or Chile 30 years ago.
And then I just want to clear one thing out in terms of a potential equity raise or issuance of equity to, say, a new partner or a strategic partner that would enter that way, not through joint venture. Would that be a problem for Teck potentially if there's another group?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Teck has been a great partner, and I think they've not only with us, but they've proven to be great partners with other juniors for many years. And so we've been pretty clear. I mean, I think a big part of the challenge that we're continuing to work through here at Arras, just to be upfront, is the education on the country, and so it's not well understood. It wasn't well understood by me 2 years ago, and it wasn't well understood by you probably 6 months ago, right? And so this is all part and parcel with regards to educating, I think, folks and even the majors that haven't been there. We've introduced Kazakhstan to a number of majors and in groups that perhaps current management teams weren't particularly familiar with it or had a perception, and we've kind of made presentations and invited them to come over, and there hasn't been anybody really that's come over and has been disappointed. I mean, it's been surprised to the upside along the way. So no, I think Teck understands that we have to obviously run our business. Teck has invested in Arras to get to know and understand Kazakhstan. I think they like what we're doing. They like our strategy. They like our approach. But equally know that they're not the only game in town as well, and that there's other companies and competitors that they have that are also looking for copper. I mean, virtually any large miner, base metal miner in the world is looking for copper right now, and as pretty well all the CEOs of those companies have said is, we don't know where the copper is going to come from that the world needs, because the current sort of production profile is not going to meet the expected demand, even close. And so this is a supply problem, and it's a supply problem largely because the mines that have been prolific, in the Chiles and the Peru, have been very successful and continue to be, but many of these mines are 10, 15, 20, 25 years old, and of course are requiring additional capital to continue to move them along. And we just haven't made the discoveries, globally around copper that perhaps we were making 20 years ago, largely because there hasn't been the investment in exploration dollars. So this is where, I think, Kazakhstan can really step in, because you can get licenses, you can do work, you can get permits to do work, you can get permits to build mines. And then on top of that, I mean, you're operating mines, at a cost structure that I don't think anywhere else in the world exists. So your Boszhakol, that is, call it 0.5% copper equivalent when you add the gold and the silver and the moly byproduct credit in there, is highly, highly profitable, because of 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour power and 50 cents a liter diesel, and lower labor costs in Kazakhstan as well. And so that mine, you pick it up and put it into BC or Arizona or Australia. I mean, maybe it works, maybe it's not even built. I don't know, but I mean, I know it makes a lot of money in Kazakhstan, just 60 kilometers down the road from where we are. So even Beskauga screens pretty well, I think, in the global scheme.
So, at the end of 2025, you have the option to either buy, as Tim mentioned previously, Beskauga for 15 million outright for 100%, or you have to relinquish the asset. There's some time until now and then, but what is the kind of ideal plan for facing this reality? And of course, there are some variations on how this could be resolved, but what would be the ideal way for you to kind of handle that?
Well, I think, I mean, talking in ideals and talking in practicalities are sometimes different.
Let's call it realistic.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that we have to be realistic with regards to what makes the most sense. I think for us right now, I mean, time's our friend, right? There's another year and a half or so to kind of figure out the best that we can, the size potential at Beskauga, and ultimately, what we think that asset is potentially worth. I mean, I think the going back to the macro picture when it comes to copper and the need for copper, for example, your overall cost structure in Kazakhstan, that asset actually screens really well. I was at a conference here just a few weeks ago, surrounded primarily by South American, North American sort of copper developers, and I looking through the assets and the resources, and Beskauga screens really well. It's just that it's Kazakhstan's not well understood. So I think for us, with regards to Beskauga, we've got options. No doubt. I mean, obviously there's an option with regards to us raising capital, bringing partners on is probably another likely one if we decide to go that direction. But ultimately, we've invested quite a bit in this already. We'll continue to invest in the asset and see what we can come up with in terms of the size potential. No doubt, as Tim mentioned as well, I mean, grade's important. So if we can add tons, but enhance the grade and really kind of outline a deposit that looks very clearly like it's a mine, then we'll have plenty of options, I think, at our option to move forward on. So let's just see where we get with it.
So the worst case scenario is relinquished. The best case scenario, you guys get appreciated by the stock market. You can raise that capital and maintain 100% ownership. The tempered scenario is that you're able to find a partner that either it becomes a joint venture or it becomes that they buy a portion of the project, pay for that 50 million, maybe add 5 million more for you to advance it or something like that. Is that kind of the right?
Yeah, I think those sorts of scenarios, definitely. I would suspect that that's probably a good way to summarize the bookend ranges. Definitely, there's still exploration to be done there, and I think using these modern techniques, I mean, we're demonstrating that through our drilling as well, going deeper, testing some of the targets that are outside of Beskauga proper, through that KGK. What does the KGK show us when we get the samples back from the bedrock? So But I think that's a good way to summarize the bookend opportunities here over the next couple of years there for Beskauga. What it really has done, though, I mean, I think got us into the country, got us set up, and then opened our eyes to the opportunities, right? And hence been able to go along now and establish a significant land package, which we're really only into it for 12 to 18 months in terms of this first summer program, and as Tim mentioned earlier, we're relying in some cases on historic Soviet reports that are 30, 40 plus years old to hone in on stuff. And so this is I don't want to say it's like Indiana Jones, but there's a little element of discovery here and adventure, and we just think we're in the right place at the right time.
And then I just want to kind of wrap up this segment about, could you kind of describe in the next 18 months, or end of 2025 is a good checkpoint because you have Beskauga there as well. What do you guys think that you can realistically have achieved? How much more capital do you think you could have attracted through joint ventures or otherwise? And where would you like to be with your progress, with your geological work as well, 18 months from now?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably the first way to start off on this is that I'm not sure. I hear various different numbers, but from discovery to operating mine in the copper or gold space is probably somewhere between 15 and 20 years now, right? That takes into account, we talked about earlier in this discussion, the permitting and many of the challenges that exist along the way. I think first and foremost, when it comes to Kazakhstan, everything that we've seen, whether it be support from the government or the process within the country, et cetera, is that really is accelerated in this country. So I think, our cost structures are lower so we can get more work done. The ability to get licenses and permits and approvals and work with local stakeholders, again, more straightforward, more simple. So I think that, opportunity really is quite significant for groups that want to explore, develop, and build mines in Kazakhstan. I think for us, if we look forward over the next couple of years, we've only had the first summer program. We're in the middle of our second summer program. And so when we look at even some of the peers that have been exploring in, say, for example, in Chile or Argentina, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 years, we've got a lot of catch up that we need to do just based on the good sort of work we can do on the ground, and we started to really do last summer. So I think over the next couple of years, definitely we want to be, generating higher quality targets, vectoring in on some of these really big systems to give us some legitimate drill targets to be moving in and testing. When we cross that over with regards to the regional license package and the potential for maybe a partner or two on some of these, I mean, realistically, 2 years out, we could have 2 or 3 or 4 different programs on different sections of these licenses and land package that are a combination of your soils and your geophysics and geochem and drilling and analysis. And it could be a pretty serious sort of, moving opportunity. And I think the benefit here is that, you're not spending $1,000 or $1,500 a meter to drill. You can get a lot of work done in a low budget. And then it really just comes down to getting the right manpower. And as Tim mentioned, I mean, we've got such a strong group of Kazakh geologists in this country that are well educated and are just brilliant. We can continue to tap that.
For the final segment, we will take a closer look at Arras' flagship asset, Beskauga. We will learn about Tim's thoughts about the project's potential in terms of grade and tonnage. Furthermore, Darren will highlight the mineral economics of the nearby Boszhakol mine, which also is a copper-gold porphyry with a similar grade profile as Beskauga. Lastly, we will wrap up on the 3-year vision for Arras. All right, to get the, a concern that some people have had, maybe it's unfounded, we'll see what you say, about the metallurgy at Beskauga. You have a pretty high arsenic content. Can you kind of explain, the situation with potential offtake agreements for the future and what that would look like and if the arsenic might be a problem or not?
Yeah, sure. Glad you asked about that because, it was actually one of the things that I really honed into myself when I first was introduced to Arras and went through the technical report and wanted to better understand it. And my, my past experience, as I mentioned, when I was with Oceana for 10 years, we developed the Didipio Copper Gold Project, and actually through that process also negotiated an offtake agreement, for the copper offtake. And so I have a bit of experience in that sort of part of the space. And so it was something that I really dug into initially. And so not uncommon, in fact, fairly common, where you've got this, the top part of the system, you've got this hydrothermal sort of overprint that's sitting at Beskauga, and you're in a more, lower temperature sort of environment. You see things like arsenic drop out, where if you're in the core of the porphyry in a higher temperature environment, you tend to not see the porphyry or the arsenic drop out. And so a lot of the drilling that had been done at Beskauga, which went into the 43101 report, was in that sort of lower temperature zone, and thus you saw higher arsenic levels. I actually reached out to a fellow that helped us when I was at Oceana Gold, when we were working on negotiating those copper offtake agreements, and wanted to talk to him about it. So he had a bit of a look, the same as I did, through the report, and we kind of went through it, and he shared with me that, today versus the 12, 14 years ago when we were doing this, the world is a different place when it comes to copper concentrates. Really from the perspective that there's a big demand for copper concentrates, and there's a few different angles that I think this will play out for Beskauga as we move forward. Number one, it's through exploration, and so it's through discovery, it's through adding more tons, but ultimately finding those higher temperature areas where the arsenic levels are more moderate, and then over the broader sort of scheme of the deposit in terms of the tonnage, your average arsenic levels then will be much more modest and easier to manage just locally within the deposit in terms of the concentrate that you'd be producing. But a second way, say for example, we continue to find more of the same, or it's a deposit that say is 300 million tons or 350 million tons, and the metallurgical sort of breakdown and the arsenic levels remain relatively the same because we're in that lower temperature sort of hydrothermal overprint. Then it's like, okay, well, we're producing concentrate and the arsenic levels are, call it 2 to 3%, versus a traditional cutoff of 0.5% for some smelters, particularly in China. And so then how do you tackle that? So two different aspects. One, through the concentrate market, you look at the value of the concentrate, and if it's actually more than 50% valued towards precious metals, then there's a different approach to that, ironically, as we understand, and actually a higher arsenic level contract in that concentrate can be allowed. In fact, up to 5 or 6%. If it's 50%, plus one towards base metals, then it's a copper concentrate, and once you get above the 0.5%, you often would start to incur penalties. But in the discussions with this concentrate marketing expert that helped us as we did a concentrate offtake agreement on this asset in the Philippines, he indicated that today, because of the demand in the copper concentrate environment, and the lack of larger projects in order which that are producing copper concentrates, that it's a much more competitive landscape, and that typically what you see now is that companies that maybe have higher levels of deleterious materials will run a process and maybe give yourself an extra 3 or 4 months to run that process, engaging with trading companies and the smelters to see where the interest is. And that typically what you find then is that for larger projects, that you'll find that the companies themselves will actually allocate capital to mixing facilities, where you're mixing perhaps a higher arsenic or higher deleterious material, copper con, with lower lower deleterious material copper concentrates, where it brings the overall average down. And so you're pulling concentrates from different mines, mixing them up, and then sending them off to the smelter, and they're meeting the thresholds so that you don't incur penalties. So that's more than likely the direction you'd head if you didn't find more. And if the concentrate was actually weighted more to copper than to gold, because as we talked about before, there's actually quite a significant gold credit here which then opens up additional optionality. So, through that whole sort of process that I went through, I became very comfortable with regards to Beskauga, and definitely a pathway forward there, one way or the other. And there's probably 2 or 3 different angles there that will play out over time.
I just want to verify, if you go with the gold concentrate option to resolve, or if you go with that option, what kind of payabilities would you expect for gold and copper, and would you see payabilities for molybdenum or not?
I think it's probably too early to comment on the payabilities. Again, it becomes down to the competitive nature of it, and to be honest, we're not going to be allocating a lot of time to detailed metallurgical reports and studies and even engaging with smelters. I mean, we're kind of an exploration company that wants to find things and move them along, and hopefully at some point we'll have a partner that that would want to develop it. I mean, I've been through that process through feasibility and construction, etc., and I'm comfortable in it. But I think for us, our strategic advantage here in Kazakhstan is really about finding things and moving them along, and then maybe partnering up. So on the payability side, I think the gold con versus copper con. I mean, ultimately it comes down to what you can produce, and because there is a significant gold credit, there's a little bit of silver here as well. I think that option potentially exists, but ultimately you're still driving for a 26% sort of copper component within the concentrate is typically, I think, what the smelters are looking for these days.
Yeah, but you're confident that would not be, you're able to put a potential partner at ease that will not be an issue either way.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that it was, as I said, it was something that I wanted to better understand as well. Is it a showstopper? For example, with Beskauga, like nothing else changes, and I got very comfortable around that. I mean, you probably wouldn't be looking at me if that wasn't the case, because that was even prior to us being able to pick up these additional licenses, etc. So, yeah, no, I mean, it was something. I mean, given with my past background, as I said, when developing copper gold asset and going through that process with regards to copper offtake agreements, etc., and that dynamic, that was helpful. But as was pointed out to me by this associate of mine, the world's very different even today from 10, 12 years ago, and that bodes well. I think if this was a really small deposit and it was in like Idaho or something like that, then you're probably not going to attract the same sort of interest from a capital allocation perspective, because there's just not enough concentrate to incentivize the trading houses and the smelters to really kind of get excited about it. It doesn't move the needle, but there's 500,000 tons of copper in the current resource here, and obviously we still think there's plenty of potential to grow this. So it does move the needle.
You have a stated goal of expanding Beskauga to become a 1 billion ton copper deposit. What is your current intuition as to the size, the size potential of Beskauga? You showcase a lot of data, but if you would put a number on it?
What I can say is we're starting to understand the Beskauga porphyry system here, and it's what you call a high K porphyry system, or a high potassium system, and these kind of systems are usually very gold rich, and usually small. So we're talking in the 200 to 300 million ton range. But what actually gives them their real target, and why they're the legitimate targets to chase, is almost guaranteed there's not just one porphyry. There's usually a cluster of these things, and so right now we've found just the one. We've got lots of smoke that suggests there's something a lot more widespread, and so I think if we can tag into another 2 or 3 of these small pencil-like porphyry systems, and add each time another 100 to 200 million tons, that that's the real potential of Beskauga. And of course, we don't know what happens at depth.
If you guys were to kind of update the resource estimate today, what do you think you would showcase in just looking at the inferred category total resource at that confidence level?
That's a hard question to answer, but I think, and the reason why it's a hard question to answer is, it in some respects it's what you want to make it. We drill a lot of low grade mineralization. If we wanted to include that, we could put something out that had huge tonnage, but it was low grade. I'd prefer to put things out that are reflective of something that could genuinely be mined. And for example, the current resource stops at about 450 meters. We've drilled underneath that to an additional 950 meters. So, just chasing it to depth, I think you could easily add another 20 or 30% to the resource, and that's before you even take into account the step out, laterally.
Yeah, and then as to your theory on the guts of the system, you have over 1 kilometer of 0.76 copper equivalent. You have just under 100 meters, 70 meters, 60 meters of over 2.5% copper equivalent. Quite not too far from surface. Are you kind of starting to form a theory on the guts of the system to hunt it down, or?
Yeah, we are, and I think what people have to bear in mind is that these porphyries are quite a bit older than, say, what you might see in Chile or Peru, which means there's just been more time for geology to do its thing, and so structure becomes a very big deal here. Have we seen our porphyries sliced and diced in this part of the world? And there's certainly some evidence that suggests that. So so has Beskauga had its head cut off, and do we need to chase that along structure, to pick up the rest of it? That's the kind of I guess additional geological process we've got to think a lot more about as we explore this.
Briefly, in terms of making this attractive for potential majors, would you prefer to kind of increase tonnage, or would you prefer to try to drill out more complex to find this high grade ore? What do you think would be more rewarded strategically?
Well, I think always grade is king. So we've got no end of low grade halo around the deposit, but if you can define, and we have defined a very high grade starter to any potential mining operation, you move into the world of a lot of the low grade that may not be economic today, especially with the new mine. That turns around and actually becomes very profitable down the line. So for me, grade is the thing to chase here.
And then one aspect that was extremely revealing for me to come down and see Boszhakol operated by Arras Minerals, proximity to your licenses and proximity to Akkuduk. When we kind of understood the cost structure of this mine, could you kind of explain what kind of grade they're dealing with there, and what kind of processing, mining costs, what to explain the stellar economics of what would look like to a novice, to be an uneconomic project?
Yeah, the Kazakhstan cost advantage is what I'm calling it, and the KCA. Boszhakol is an example which is on this belt. Tim talked about it, Boszhakol and Nurkargan and Beskauga, being three known porphyries on this Boszhakol-Chingis magmatic arc. Boszhakol and also Nurkargan operating mines. And when you look at Boszhakol, billion tons, reserve grade is 0.35, 0.36% copper. It's got a bit of gold, it's got a bit of moly, and just a kind of a sliver of silver. I think on an equivalent basis, it's about 0.55% copper equivalent. But that mine is 30 million tons per annum through the plant. It's about a 1-to-1 strip ratio currently, so you're moving about 60 million tons per annum. So it's a reasonable size mine. And the cost structure there is from what we understand. I mean, what we can find online and through information that's available publicly. Pretty competitive. The diesel price helps. I mean, obviously, it's 50 cents a liter. I mean, that drives a mining cost in that $1.10 to $1.40 range per ton. You look at the power costs at call it 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour there. That helps to drive a processing costs in the range of $5 a ton. I think from a G&A perspective, I think you'd be hard pressed to, have a G&A of more than $1 a ton, 30 million tons through the plant. When you add that all in and you look at it producing, copper concentrates, you've got a 0.55% copper equivalent mine that is, generating well north, I think, of $500 million a year of EBITDA, and this is using perhaps somewhat conservative numbers, but there's definitely a Kazakhstan cost advantage, and I think if you pick that mine up and you dropped it into Australia or Canada or even Latin America, like you wouldn't come anywhere close to that, and so that's something that I think on an apples to apples basis one has to kind of take into account. And so when you look at Beskauga and it's got 0.5 gram gold and 0.3% copper, smaller tons obviously, but that grade actually looks pretty nice compared to even Boszhakol, right? And of course much earlier stage, etc., and not as big. But this is the whole premise, I think, of trying to explore and make things bigger. And in a world where the copper price is at $3.50 to $4 a pound, not 60 cents. And by all intents, anybody that you talk to, I think in the space or analysts say like the copper price is going up. These 0.5% copper equivalent mines look very attractive in a place like Kazakhstan.
And then finally for you, Tim, if you would just look at Arras from 3 years from now, ideally, what's your hopes for the company? Where do you aim to be in 3 years from now?
Yeah, good question. So I think Arras is where I hope we're going to be is we've drilled 3 or 4 new porphyry discoveries, because I genuinely think we have that potential, and we've seen Beskauga move to the next stage, which is looking to do the appropriate reports around putting it into production, and I would say hopefully we've got some really good partners on board to help us do that. So I think the next 3 or 4 years here are going to be very exciting, and it's the reason why I'm living there, is because I don't think you can make that happen without physically being on the ground and having a hand in the direction of the company.